Alright Google, play my Pixel 7 review. This is the Pixel 7, the regular version. And for those who missed it, last year's version of this phone, the Pixel 6, was actually my preferred choice out of both the Pixel 6 and 6 Pro. And in fact, I actually continued using it on and off for about 6 months as my main everyday device. And so, needless to say, I was super excited to start using and reviewing this phone because I expected a very similar experience this time around. And just to clarify, the device I was using right before this one was the Pixel 7 Pro, which I really enjoyed. And so switching immediately to this more budget-friendly variant provided me with some really fascinating insight. And so 2 months after its release, I'm finally ready to share my thoughts on it. You ready? Let's dive in. We'll start with the design, and much like the 7 Pro, the regular Pixel 7 has also seen some minor design updates over last year's regular Pixel 6. So instead of that black glass visor for the camera unit on the back, we now have this singular piece of metal that blends right into the sides, as well as that prominent cutout for the cameras here. The power and volume buttons are also a bit lower on the side of the phone, but this change feels much more subtle compared to the difference between the 6 Pro and 7 Pro. The regular 7 is also ever so slightly shorter compared to the regular 6, which actually makes it quite a bit more comfortable for one-handed use in my opinion. And whilst the side rails do still have that matte finish like the regular Pixel 6 had, they're now in this lighter colorway. And whilst this might seem like a subtle change on the surface, the benefit of this switch is that it makes the bezels on the front of the phone look way smaller. And aside from this fairly prominent chin down the bottom, which has seen no improvement over last year's device unfortunately, I actually think the front of this phone is really, really pretty. And so thanks to the completely flat display, the smaller form factor, and the matte rails and matte camera unit, which seems to hide scratches far more than the shiny camera unit found on the back of the 7 Pro does, I actually quite prefer the Pixel 7 in terms of design over the 7 Pro. As for haptics, whether intentional from Google or not, last year I actually thought that the haptics on the regular 6 were better than those found on the 6 Pro thanks to the extra layer of subtlety that they had. But this year, the opposite is actually true, whereby the 7 Pro's haptics have the slight edge in terms of how premium they feel. Don't get me wrong, the haptics on the regular 7 are still really, really good, but they're also not quite as good as what I think are the industry-leading haptics found on the 7 Pro. What is just as good though is this new in-display fingerprint sensor, as well as the newly added face unlock implementation. I went into quite a bit of detail on this fantastic combo in my review of the 7 Pro, so I'm not going to cover it at length in this video again, but all you need to know is that thanks to the excellent software implementation of the camera-based face unlock, as well as some improvements in regards to the hardware being used for the actual in-display fingerprint sensor itself, what you end up with is a really seamless biometric unlocking experience that is way faster and way more reliable compared to last year's Pixel 6 lineup. But then we come to the first proper downgrade over the 7 Pro, which is this display. Now, first things first, it does actually get as bright as the 7 Pro when in direct sunlight, though the peak brightness is slightly lower when watching HDR content. But I don't know if it's my imagination or not, but for some reason, the 90Hz panel found on this phone actually feels ever so slightly less fluid when comparing it right up against the 90Hz panel found on last year's Pixel 6. And in fact, last year, I could hardly tell the difference between the 6 and 6 Pro's display in terms of fluidity, but this year, the difference between the 7 and 7 Pro's display is definitely something that I've noticed. Now, with that being said, it is still a nice balance in terms of price to performance, but when you factor in that it's not as sharp as the Pixel 7 Pro's display, and like I said, that it's noticeably not as fluid, I don't know, I feel like I'm feeling the difference between the two displays quite a bit more so than I did last year. Now, the upside to that 90Hz display downgrade with the regular Pixel 6 last year, though, was improved battery life. But unfortunately, for some strange reason, that's actually not the case with the regular Pixel 7 this time around, to where I'm seeing quite a bit worse battery performance compared to the 7 Pro. And you can probably attribute that to the fact that the battery capacity is actually surprisingly smaller in this year's regular Pixel 7, being 4355 milliamp hours in comparison to the 4614 milliamp hours of the regular Pixel 6, or perhaps that this doesn't have an LTPO display like the 7 Pro does. But whatever the reason, I'm finding myself rarely getting to the end of each day without needing to charge the device. Now, to be clear, there have been some days of light use where it was sitting at like 20 to 30% of battery life remaining when I was hopping into bed, but most days it was only just getting there by the skin of its teeth, and on several occasions, I actually had to plug it in by around 8 PM. It's not atrocious, but it's definitely a step down from the bigger 7 Pro. Now, thankfully, one key redeeming area is in regards to software and performance. This phone has the exact same G2 Tensor chipset inside that the 7 Pro has, and all of the other performance-based specs are the same as well when comparing the base models, and so it kind of makes sense that the two phones perform nearly identically. Now, I'm not going to chat about this at length as, again, I covered this area in detail in my review of the 7 Pro, but in short, thanks to the fact that this phone ships with Android 13, which was a much more iterative update compared to Android 12, the phone has been far more reliable and less buggy compared to what both the Pixel 6 and 6 Pro were like at launch last year. Just one thing to note though is that whilst I found using Nova Launcher to be quite a pleasant experience on the 7 Pro, I think thanks to the slightly less fluid 90Hz display, I haven't quite enjoyed my time using Nova Launcher on the regular 7 as much as I did on the 7 Pro, to the point where if I was to keep using this as my main everyday device, I would actually seriously consider unlocking root access and using this Pixel Launcher Mods utility to customize the stock Pixel Launcher instead, to therefore retain as much software fluidity as possible. And then finally, we have the cameras. And aside from the downgraded display, the less premium haptics, or the underperforming battery life, the camera experience is actually the one area that I have found is the biggest downgrade overall in comparison to the 7 Pro. You see, last year when comparing the 6 and 6 Pro, the only significant difference between the two devices in terms of cameras was the lack of a 4x telephoto lens on the regular Pixel 6. Yes, it also technically had a worse selfie camera, but unless you were someone who wanted the absolute highest quality selfies on the market, you really only noticed that lack of a telephoto lens. Well, this year, whilst the regular Pixel 7 got the same upgraded selfie lens that the 7 Pro got, which was primarily to enable the face unlock authentication, the more important change that the 7 Pro got being the much improved ultra-wide lens with autofocus and therefore macro shooting capabilities, it did not come to the regular 7, and it actually still has the severely underperforming ultra-wide lens that we had on last year's 6 and 6 Pro, and even this year's Pixel 6a. And so, despite the fact that we do have that new 2x cropped shooting mode that the Pixel 7 Pro has, thanks to the much weaker ultra-wide lens, as well as the lack of a 5x telephoto lens and therefore the subsequent 10x cropped shooting mode, the entire camera experience just feels much more underpowered in comparison to the 7 Pro. Like I said, last year I really only noticed not having that 4x telephoto lens. But this year I feel like I have 4 less lenses to shoot with: the 0.5 ultra wide, the macro mode, the 5x telephoto, and that 10x cropped mode. Now, don't get me wrong, the results from the lenses that are available on this phone are still pretty amazing, in particular those from the main lens, which is the same as the 7 Pro. And if one amazing lens is all you're after, then the main lens on this phone outperforms pretty much anything else on the market. But where last year the camera experience was almost identical to the one found on the proper flagship variant, this year it's way more underwhelming. And so, to my absolute surprise, this year, I actually think the upgrades found on the bigger, more expensive Pixel 7 Pro make the price difference totally justifiable. I mean, just look at this list. You get a noticeably more fluid 120Hz display, you get better haptics, you get better battery life. There's the much improved ultra-wide lens and the subsequent macro shooting capability. Then there's the addition of a 5x telephoto lens and therefore a 10x cropped shooting mode. And hopefully it's starting to become clear why I think the 7 Pro is actually worth the extra money. Now, for what it's worth, the Pixel 7 is still an amazing device with a phenomenal price tag. And for a lot of people, it's probably still the phone that I would recommend that they get, especially if they did not care for those telephoto lens shooting options. But for me, it just didn't quite get the upgrades over last year's Pixel 6 that I was hoping it would. And so whilst I preferred last year's Pixel 6 over the 6 Pro, this year it's without question the other way around.